Knowing how these guys relate to the wall inside of our gut, the inner lining of our gut, and that crosstalk across that wall will determine what's going to happen to you. Most people can't do prolonged fasting for even more than a few hours because they can't access the fat that they've stored. All of us have the power to heal ourselves.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like 9 and 9. For my top 10, top 10, 9 and 9. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because chances are you are the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Dr. Stephen Gundry, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Trust your gut feeling.
Women have a gut feeling far better than men. And that is because women actually are far better capable of listening to their microbiome. And I get kind of deep into the fact that our microbiome is inherited from our mother. We get it from our mother. And all of the mitochondria, the little energy-producing organelles in us, are actually engulfed bacteria that are inherited from our mother. And they have their own separate DNA and their maternal DNA. And there is now actually very good evidence that the bacteria in our microbiome communicate via text messages that now have been measured to mitochondria. They're sisters. And about how things are going in the body and the outside world.
It's so crazy. So
women, trust your gut.
Rule number 2, reduce animal protein.
what's your take on eggs?
The yolk of the egg may be the most beneficial food that has ever been invented. And as long as the chickens are fed what they're designed to eat. Well, I actually ask people to mainly throw the whites away. So we'll do a 4-egg omelet, but 4 of them are yolks and just use 1 white.
And what is it in the whites or about the whites that make them problematic?
It's animal protein. And let's look at another reason not to eat animal protein, sadly. So animal protein, there's a sensor in all of our cells called mTOR, and it senses energy availability, and it senses sugar availability, but it senses certain amino acid availability. So if you avoid or lessen your amount of animal protein, your mTOR will fall. Now, we have no way of measuring clinically mTOR, but we can use a surrogate for that, which is insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1. And in my super old people, and I study a lot of super olds, 95 and above, wow. They all have extremely low insulin-like growth factors.
And why is that a number you want to get down?
Because super old people always run low insulin-like growth factors. They always do. And in my upcoming book, The Longevity Paradox, if you look at societies of the blue zones, the longest living people on Earth, the common factor that they all have in their diet, they have very diverse diets. There's no universal diet that these people follow. And I was a professor at one of the blue zones, Loma Linda, for most of my life. The thing that separates or unites all of those various diets is they eat very little animal protein.
Rule number 3, avoid toxic foods.
What are the main plants that we should never be eating then?
Okay, real quick. Up until 10,000 years ago, we lived primarily on the leaves of trees, and we ate tubers that grew in the ground, like a sweet potato for a yam.
Love those.
Yeah, they're
Sweet
actually
potatoes are so
they're
good.
pretty darn good for you. You were actually designed to eat them. And
Good.
12,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, we switched over to things that we had never eaten before. And those were the grains of grasses and beans. Now, the reason we'd never eaten them before is, number one, we didn't need to. There's never been a documentation of an ape eating grass or grains. Beans are so lethal that 5 raw kidney beans will kill a human being in 5 minutes by coagulating their blood.
What?
5 raw kidney beans.
Raw kidney beans.
In fact, most people have heard of the poison ricin, the white powder you send to your elected official.
Yeah.
Lots on the way to Washington,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
another subject. So ricin is the lectin of the castor bean, and we'll talk about lectins next. A lectin is the plant defense system. These are proteins that are designed to basically kill us in one way or another.
Oh my gosh.
And so ricin is so powerful that about 4 molecules of ricin will kill a human being instantaneously. There's a great study that was written up in one of the journals about a few years ago. They decided to have a healthy eating day in Boston.
Yeah.
And they served the kids beans. And because it's so healthy.
Right.
Part of the blue zone.
Yes.
And they had 30 or 40 admissions to the hospital.
No way.
With severe diarrhea, hypotension, and it turns out that it was all the fact that the beans were undercooked. And beans are a plant baby, and we're not supposed to eat those. And so,
No beans.
no beans.
0 beans.
Unless you use a
Pinto
pressure,
black beans.
pinto black.
None of it. We shouldn't be eating it.
Shouldn't be. You weren't designed to eat it. You have
Not-
no defense
no
system
matter how it's
against
cooked,
it. If you
boiled.
pressure cook it, it's fine.
Pressure cook it. What does
Yeah.
that even mean?
Put it in a pressure cooker.
Pressure
the
cooker.
modern pressure cooker is as easy as a rice cooker.
Got it.
It's one touch. It's not your grandmother's pressure
Got it.
cooker that blew up in the kitchen. And
So then it's okay to eat.
yeah, so you can pressure cook beans. Now the other thing, we weren't designed to eat grains.
Now,
And
just a quick question before you start there. How much of it can we eat? Does it matter once it's pressure cooked?
here's-
Obviously, everything in moderation, but I mean,
yeah, well, like I was
it's
presenting.
like 20 beans are going to kill me, or what?
No,
what's
if
the-
you pressure cook them, they're fine.
it's all good. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And we talk about how to do this in the plant
Got it.
paradox.
Got it. Okay, cool.
But my personal feeling is the only purpose of eating a bean is to get olive oil into my mouth, and we can talk about that
Got it.
as we go along.
Okay.
So grains, for instance, everybody heard about gluten.
Yes.
All right. So gluten is a lectin. And again, a lectin is a plant's defense system. It's a protein that actually is designed to act like incoming guided missile attacks
Wow.
on the inside wall of our gut. And these things actually pry open the lining of our gut and actually break through the border.
Really?
Yeah, they really do. And
That's what causes eczema and
Bingo.
causes breakouts.
Yeah,
and-
exactly. Acne,
All that
brain fog, irritable bowel. This is actually all part of that process.
Wow.
And so it's fascinating to see people who either have come to see me or have even read the book and then write on Amazon, oh my gosh, I had this horrible eczema and now a month later it's all gone and all I did was, take grains and beans and nightshades away from my diet and everything got better. So that brings us to the second kind of group of things we shouldn't eat. All of us are not from the United States, America. We're actually from Europe, Asia, or Africa. Every one of us.
Yeah.
So, and even our Native Americans are actually not Native Americans. They're from Asia. Get over it.
Right. Right.
So none of us were exposed to an American plant until 500 years ago when Columbus started trade. So getting to know a new plant, a new lectin in 500 years is speed dating in evolution. And I just don't think it can be done. For instance, the Italians refused to eat tomatoes for 200 years after their native son Columbus brought them back because they knew how dangerous they were. They were part of the deadly nightshade family.
Really?
And they when they started eating them, they always peeled and de-seeded their tomatoes because the peels and the seeds actually have the vast majority of the lectins. And it's interesting. Years ago, I was did my fellowship in children's heart surgery in London, England, and I had a house officer from Italy, and he invited me up for pasta and tomato sauce.
Yes.
And so I brought, it'd be nice if I bought a couple cans of canned tomatoes, help out.
Sure.
And he looks at it, he says, "Why did you bring me this? We can't use this." And I said, "What do you mean? It's canned tomatoes." He says, "It's got peels and seeds. You can't make sauce with peels and seeds." He says, "Mamma mia, what am I going to do with you?" He says, you can't use peels and seeds. And I said, "Why?" He says, "They're deadly." And I said, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, everybody knows that." And then I thought back. As a child, my grandmother was French, and she taught my mother that you always peel and de-seed tomatoes before you slice them and serve them. So until I went to Yale, I had never had a slice of a tomato with a peel and a seed.
Wow.
And this was, this has come from cultures.
Yeah.
For instance, peppers. Peppers are the same way. They're part of the nightshade family. You'll never open a glass jar of Italian bell peppers and see peels and seeds because they're gone. And the most striking thing is the Southwest American Indians always peel and de-seed their peppers before they eat them. The hatch chili roast will be happening in another month. And what do? They roast their chilies, peel the scarred off part, de-seed them, and then they eat them or they make them into chili powder.
Right.
And, you can prove this in your grocery store. Buy a can of green chilies, chopped green chilies, open it up. You won't see any peels and seeds because they're gone.
So tomatoes and
Peppers,
and
eggplant, potatoes. And potatoes,
if you peel them and seed these things,
you're safer, correct. But you can pressure cook them and they're fine.
and they're okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Now, there's two American beans that everyone should stay away from. Peanuts are not a nut, they're a bean.
So good though.
94% of human beings carry a preformed antibody against the peanut lectin. We can take rhesus monkeys, our cousins, give them peanut oil, and they will develop atherosclerosis, heart disease.
Really?
If we take the lectin out of the peanut oil and then give them the peanut oil, they will not develop heart disease.
So if you get lectin-free peanut butter,
there is no such thing.
dang it. Okay.
So get almond butter instead.
Yes.
It's much
So
safer.
no peanut butter.
No, stay away from it.
You should
It's
eliminate it
really
100% from your
Absolutely.
system.
We can take, and this has been done, men, feed them peanuts, take their bowel movements, feed them to rats, and you will grow cancerous cells in the rat colon because they've been exposed to the peanut lectin.
Rule number 4, work on the maternal microbiome pre-pregnancy.
We've known for actually a long time, since the microbiome was identified and sequenced, that we know that, number one, kids with autism have a lot more irritable bowel, and they have a lot more GI issues, and they actually have a very different microbiome than, quote, normal. And there's been a suggestion for years that maybe it is that microbiome that is contributing, not going to say cause, autism. There's even more exciting work in gynecology and obstetrics that there is a microbiome in the vagina that we know about, but there is a microbiome of the placenta itself. And there's some actually exciting work that perhaps the microbiome of the placenta is the most important in terms of educating the neonate, the fetus's immune system.
Do you only encounter that as you're actually born and you go through it?
During
so the whole time
pregnancy.
you're washing it. Then why would a C-section be so problematic?
Well, so one of the theories of autism is that this is an in utero problem that happened to the kid before he was born or she was born. The reasons I say he is that boys have it far more than girls. And that now there is interesting evidence that we should be working on the maternal microbiome before pregnancy, and certainly during pregnancy. We need to start early in making sure the microbiome's right.
Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, the science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action for the habit to stick. That's what I want for you. So I've designed a custom free program where I'm going to send you an unlisted video for the next 254 days to shift your confidence and belief forward. The link to join is in the description below.
Doesn't matter how talented you are, if you don't have self-belief, you're not going to get anywhere.
I believe when you wake up, you should get up. The second you wake up, get your feet hit the floor, move into action.
If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about.
Rule number 5, understand the 99%.
90% of the cells that make up you, me, are non-human. They are bacteria, viruses, fungus, parasites, worms.
Wow.
So 90% of you and me is not me, is not you. It's all these other guys.
Wow.
So you're basically a condominium for what I call bugs. And if we look at the genetic material that constitutes us, the genes, the genetic material, all the DNA of all these other guys is 99% of all the genetic material that's in you and me. So the book is, let's take care, forget about the 1%ers, our genes. Let's understand that 99% of the genetic material in us is non-us, but that's the important guys. And
Why is it so important?
because they control our fate. And the point of the longevity paradox is that knowing what these guys want, and I call them bugs, good bugs and bad bugs, knowing what these guys want to eat and knowing how these guys relate to the wall inside of our gut, the inner lining of our gut, and that crosstalk across that wall will determine what's going to happen to you.
Rule number 6, reduce calorie intake.
My mentor, Dr. Morrow, always said that you only have so many heartbeats, and when you use those up, that's the end. And he's actually right in a lot of ways, but the corollary to that is, let's suppose your design is that you only get so many calories in your lifetime, and you can use them quickly or you can spread them out. And that's why fasting is so useful, and intermittent fasting is so useful, because it's actually an easy way just to reduce your calorie intake. And it's, once you learn how to do it, it's an easy way to make this system work.
Rule number 7, manipulate the immune system.
What's the cause of these heart diseases?
So
And
it's
the reason why you have to do so many of these.
It's all in the plant paradox. So 17 years ago, I met a guy by the name of Big Ed. It was a 38-year-old guy who came to see me at Loma Linda because I'm one of these surgeons who will operate on anybody.
Wow. Big Ed.
Take the rip. Big Ed.
500-pounder?
Big Ed, actually, when I met him, he weighed 265 pounds. Wow. But he had such extensive coronary artery disease that you couldn't put stents in him, you couldn't do bypasses because there wasn't any place to land. And he was from Miami, and he'd been going around the country carrying his angiogram, the movie of his heart, his cardiac catheterization. And everybody's turning him down. And he finally, after about 6 months of this, comes to see me, and I'm looking at his angiogram, and I'm going, I don't like to turn people down, but everybody's right. We're not going to do you any good. And he said, well, wait a minute. Here's the deal, doc. I've been on a diet for the last 6 months, and I've lost 45 pounds. Now, this is a 265-pounder sitting across from me. It looks like a biker, big gut. And he says, and I've gone to this health food store, and I've taken all these supplements. And he actually brought in this shopping bag full of supplements. He said, maybe I did something in here. And I'm going, yeah, right. I'm kind of scratching my professor beard and saying, well, I know good for you for losing weight, but it it's not going to do anything in here. And I know what you did with all those supplements. You made expensive urine.
Right.
And I really believe that. So he said, well, come on, it's been 6 months. I've come all this way. What would it hurt to get another angiogram, another cardiac catheterization? I said, okay. And so we get a new cath on him. And in 6 months' time, this guy cleans out 50% of the blockages in his heart. 50%. Gone.
Pretty good.
It's pretty darn good. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
For instance, statistically, on the best statin drug, like Crestor, Lipitor, with the lowest levels of LDL, we scientists at the American Heart Association get crazy if after 5 years your plaque burden has decreased 0.5%.
Wow.
And we go crazy and we go, oh my gosh, this is a miracle. It's the greatest drug discovery of all time.
Right.
And we go, really? So this guy, 50% are gone in 6 months. So I actually was so excited, I operated on him and did a 5-vessel bypass. But if I knew what I knew now, I'd say, hey, great, another year, this will all be clear.
Keep going. You won't need the surgery.
So I start talking to him about what he did on this diet. And lo and behold, he gets started on this. I go, time out. I said, I had this crazy thesis at Yale University that I did for 4 years back in the dark ages of human evolutionary biology. And my thesis was you could take a great ape, change its food supply, and change its environment and predict you would arrive at a human being. And I actually successfully defended it and got honors, blah, blah, blah. And so I had given it to my parents and went off to be a famous heart surgeon.
Sure.
And so he's talking about this. I go, wait a minute, this is my crazy thesis. And here I am, this big guy, running, and I had pre-diabetes.
You were.
Yeah.
This is 15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Running and eating a healthy low-fat diet. And
why did all the doctors seem like they're bigger?
Yeah, exactly. And, we're given all this advice. And so I called my parents in San Diego. I said, hey, you got this thesis? Oh, yeah, it's in the shrine.
Yes.
Eternal flame.
The whole room of your accomplishments.
Yeah, that's right. So I said, send it up to me. So I put myself on my thesis, and I lost 50 pounds my first year.
Wow.
And I lost another 20 pounds subsequently, and I've taken it off. And then I started putting my patients who, at Loma Linda, who I operated on this program, and their blood pressure went to normal, their diabetes went away, their heart disease didn't come back. And so after about a year of this, I was looking in the mirror on one Friday, and I said, I can't do what I do anymore because I can teach people how to avoid me. So I actually resigned my position. My wife still calls it Black Friday.
When was this?
15 years ago.
You resigned?
I resigned.
From doing surgeries
from being chairman of heart surgery at Loma Linda. Yeah.
Wow. Just because you felt like this wasn't solving the actual
It wasn't solving
root.
the problem. It was just putting a Band-Aid on it.
The surgeries.
The surgeries, yeah. I was famous for 4-time, 5-time redo surgeries on somebody who kept clogging up their blood vessels. And it's like...
You could fix them up, but it's like...
Yeah, okay, they're going to be back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So I set up an institute in Palm Springs where all I ask people to do is every 3 months, let me take about 10 tubes of blood out of you, and we'll send it to some labs. Insurance will pay for it.
Wow.
And see what asking you to eat certain foods does, and asking you to take certain supplements that you could find at Costco or Trader Joe's does. And that resulted in my first book in 2008 called Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution. But then subsequently, I've seen about 50% of my practice is autoimmune disease. And people would come in and say, hey, what do you know about autoimmune disease? And I go, I don't know anything about autoimmune disease, but I'm a transplant immunologist, and that means how do I get the immune system of you to accept the heart of a pig, for instance. And I hold the world record for the longest pig to baboon heart transplant, 28 days. That's the world record. Wow. So I started manipulating the immune system by food. And sure enough, you've got an autoimmune disease, we can teach you to get rid of it by changing, primarily getting lectins out of your diet.
That's it, huh?
And changing your gut bugs to be basically friendly gut bugs. And the friendly gut bugs actually tell your immune system that, hey guys, we're all great down here. We're down at the beach. We're singing Kumbaya, the beautiful bonfire. And your immune system is basically the cops. And the cops go, oh, yeah, we know these kids, great kids. Let's go have a donut. And now, so that's how it's supposed to be. But let's suppose a gang member moves into your neighborhood. Now, all of a sudden, you're putting up bars on your windows, and you got neighborhood watch patrols, and you're shooting guys with hoodies without asking questions. So what's happened to most of us, through some of the foods we eat, like all these wonderful snacks we're talking about, we've let these gang members loose. And the good guys actually can't eat simple sugars and these saturated fats. They want leaves and they want tubers.
So they die off.
They die off, exactly. So the gang members are running rampant, and now your immune system is going, oh my gosh, the city's taken over by gang members, and we're going to have armed patrols everywhere, and anytime we see anything that looks a little odd, we're going to shoot and ask questions later. And so what's happened to everybody with autoimmune disease is their immune system is just hyper on guard because it's no longer getting the messages from the good bugs. Chill out, everything's cool, kumbaya, love, 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 peace and love. And that's what's happened.
Rule number 8, grow the good bugs.
What's a quick overlay of lifestyle and dietary choices that people should make if they want to die young at a ripe old age, as the subheadline of the book goes?
So we know that there are ways to give these good guys like Akkermansia what they like to eat. And they love resistant starches. They love tubers like yams, like jicama, like taro root, like yucca or yucca. They love mushrooms. And there's a beautiful recent study out of South Asia of people basically having a 90% reduction in Alzheimer's if you eat 2 cups of mushrooms a week.
What?
So there is this incredible compound in mushrooms. I'll probably fracture it. Thionine, that actually crosses the blood-brain barrier better than turmeric, curcumin, and actually protects against neuroinflammation. And it turns out that mushrooms absolutely positively feed these friendly bacteria. And mushrooms contain this compound called spermidine. It's a polyamine that study after study shows promotes longevity. Okay, so those are some of the things. Also, inulin-containing compounds. So inulin is present in chicory. You can buy inulin made out of yacon root in any store as a sweetener. So inulin feeds Akkermansia. And so it's present in chicory, it's present in radicchio, Belgian endive, Jerusalem artichokes, sunchokes. They're just pure inulin. So the more of this stuff you eat, the more of this bug you're going to grow.
Rule number 9, check your insulin levels.
So I'm a huge proponent of intermittent fasting and fasting in general. How do you do it? How do you make it an easy process?
So I started 11 years ago at January 1st to June 1st. During the week, I would eat all my calories in a 2-hour window from 6 to 8 o'clock at night. So that 22 out of the 24 hours every day, 5 days a week, I was fasting 22 hours. Now, why 6 to 8 o'clock at night? Because that's when my wife and I were at home. And now, this is, as you know, for a professional driver on a closed course.
Right.
What most people who try to do this don't realize, about 80% of us in America are insulin resistant. We have much too much insulin production. And I won't bore you or the listeners, but most people can't do prolonged fasting for even more than a few hours because they can't access the fat that they've stored.
Right.
And they crash. and it's often called the Atkins flu or the low-carb flu, where they have to be able to transition over to using ketones as a fuel. Now, you can get there fairly quickly, and we have tips in the book on how to do that. You actually have to use exogenous ketones for a while, things like MCT oil, things like coconut oil, even red palm oil. There's a little bit of exogenous ketones in butter. It's called butyric acid.
Yeah, it's intermittent fasting is really, really powerful for alleviating brain fog, for changing your relationship to hunger is how I always think of it. It's just fundamentally different. And then getting your machinery used to actually accessing your body fat and all that.
We're designed to use up fat. We just have to, use the tricks to get to that fat. For most people who are overweight or obese, what's so frustrating for them is they try things like intermittent fasting, and they're pretty miserable. They get headaches, and they're very hungry. Their brain is going, hey, what's the deal? You've cut me off. It's water everywhere and not a drop to drink. And we see so many overweight and obese people. And I was 70 pounds overweight. I was obese, running 30 miles a week and going to the gym 1 hour a day.
Wow.
And going, how come I'm such a fat guy? I couldn't get to my fat stores because I had an elevated insulin level. When I first, got my insulin level, wow, what's that? Now I have a very low insulin level.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clip, is enjoy this fun fact.
Fun fact, your recent study shows that women's breast milk has bacteria and funguses in the breast milk that feed the microbiome, that seed the microbiome of the baby. We've known for quite some time that, the microbiome, and the microbiome, again, is all these other inhabitants of us.
Now I've got a really special bonus clip that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? The science says that when you just watch a video, you get motivated, you get inspired, you have a 35% chance of following through on your goals. 35%! That's not enough. That's not enough just to get motivated. Believe Nation, we're here. You're here. Today matters. You're an action taker. When you commit to a plan of action of when and how you're going to follow through, when you write it down, you have a 91% chance of following through. And when you commit publicly to somebody else, it jumps to 95% chance. From 30-something% to 95% chance of you following through. Believe Nation, we need to make this happen. So question of the day, your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action specific for the next week. Put it down in the comments below, and I'm going to show on screen sometime next week to celebrate.
I don't know what functional medicine means.
Right.
What I do is restorative medicine.
Great.
All of us have the power to heal ourselves. Now, the guy who said this was Hippocrates, and Hippocrates, brilliant. He believed that any organism had the ability to have perfect health. And that every organism had the ability to achieve perfect health as long as the obstacles to perfect health were removed. And Hippocrates believed that the physician's job was to identify the obstacles to that organism having perfect health, the patient, and remove them from the patient. And the patient would do the rest.
Yes.
So what I try to do, I basically do detective work. And I think I'm pretty good at finding the obstacles. And many of those obstacles, believe it or not, are lectins. And the other obstacle is you got to get the gang members out of your gut by basically starving them to death and giving the good guys what they want to eat.
Starving them of the lectins.
Starving them of simple sugars.
Yes.
And lectins and saturated fats. Like,
you remove those things.
Yeah, they have nothing to eat, and they leave. For instance, I'll give you an example of something interesting. We actually have bacteria in our gut that enjoy eating gluten, a lectin.
Really?
Yeah, they love it. But if you go gluten-free, they leave because they got nothing to eat.
Yes.
And then a lot of people who go gluten-free and don't notice a whole lot of difference, or they just get frustrated and then they have a couple pieces of bread or pizza, and then all of a sudden their gut goes, oh, you know. Well, it's because their bugs that could defend them against gluten are gone. And believe it or not, gluten is kind of a low-level lectin. There's far worse. The worst ones are in the hull of the grain. So, for instance, this whole grain goodness, this only started about 50 years ago.
No such thing as whole grain goodness.
No, we've gotten sicker and sicker and sicker because the outside of the hull has the lectins, and we've been throwing it away. I mean, really, the French, seriously, would they have a whole grain croissant or a whole grain baguette? Really? And the Italians, whole grain pasta. Well, now it's appearing on the menus because the tourists want to see it.
Yeah.
But the Italians would kill themselves.
What are some of the things you learned through the process over the last couple of years that people were finding out about themselves and discovering about other things? You've got this new book about living longer, longevity paradox. So what were some of the things that you've learned over the last couple of years about health in general with people?
So I think one of the things was probably one of the most controversial statements in the plant paradox was that it's your bad health is not your fault.
It's your DNA, right? It's your genes?
Yeah, it's your genes and DNA. And I go into a lot of this in the longevity paradox, that in fact, your genes have very little to do with what's going to happen to you, in both, in the immediate period and in long term. And there's a big, huge study looking at millions of people around the world and their outcome, looking at their genetics, their DNA, and their DNA has only probably about a 6% influence on you, your health, what's going to happen to you. So that means
including like diseases you might pick up. So why do we always, when we go to the doctor, they say, well, did your father have a stroke or a heart attack? Did your mother have dementia?
So when I ask that question, and I do, what that tells me is that if your mother had diabetes or your father had coronary artery disease, that tells me that if you eat like your parents did, then you will most likely have those diseases, not because you inherited that from your parents, but you learned to eat from your parents. And it actually goes beyond that. Not only did you learn to eat from your parents, but you shared the microbiome, the bugs in your gut that your parents had. In fact, as we talk about in the book, you can take identical twins and raise them apart, and they will actually have microbiomes more in common with the family that they were raised with than their identical twin. And the health outcomes of those identical twins will not parallel genetics. They will parallel the microbiome that they acquired living with that other family. Lectins are plant proteins that are one of the major defense systems of a plant against being eaten. One of the things that's hard for us to conceptualize is that plants do not want to be eaten. They actually have a life, and they were actually here first. When insects arrived, plants had a problem because they couldn't run, they couldn't fight, they couldn't hide. But they have a huge advantage, and that's they're chemists. They can turn sunlight into matter, and we haven't figured out how to do that yet. So what they do is they make proteins that are sometimes called sticky proteins or lectins that stick to certain sugar molecules in us, particularly in our gut lining. Just by the way, if anybody has sinusitis or runny noses when they eat certain foods, you are actually producing sugar molecules in your mucus to trap lectins. And I have so many people who had chronic sinusitis, including myself, when we finally got lectins out of our diet, they completely went away. So lectins bind to sugar molecules. Lectins cause the wall of our gut to actually separate, and people have heard the term leaky gut. I used to, if you'd asked me 15 years ago if I thought leaky gut was a problem, I would have said it was pseudoscience. Now, with the advances in understanding how the microbiome works and in understanding how lectins work, I think everyone who has a disease has a leaky gut. Now, I'm pretty dumb. Hippocrates said this 2,500 years ago, that all disease begins in the gut. So one of the things we know about research is research. Look again, because somebody already knew this, and Hippocrates knew it 2,500 years ago.
Have you ever had one of those days where you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed? You're cranky, grumpy, and just plain off? The worst part, when you're having a lousy day, can just seem like nothing is going to turn your mood around. Maybe you try a nap, meditation, exercise, but still the mood just sticks around. Well, when it comes to lousy moods, and possibly even bigger mental health problems, there's one thing you may not be considering. Now let's get back to that lousy mood and the one incredibly effective thing you may not be trying. It all comes down to one really interesting scientific phenomenon, the gut-brain axis. Now, I could talk about the gut-brain axis all day, but for now, I'll just explain the quick version. To put it simply, your gut and your brain actually communicate with one another through your nervous system. It's actually pretty strong two-way communication. For example, when you're stressed, your brain lets your gut know, which is why so many people report having a nervous stomach when there's something stressful going on. And when your stomach is upset, for whatever reason, it can actually impact your mood, your energy level, and even your ability to focus. It's no wonder some scientists call your gut your second brain. It's got such a profound effect on the way you feel, body and mind, which is why if you're struggling with a lousy mood, it might be time to look at your diet. And no, I'm not just talking about grabbing some carb-heavy comfort food, though a piece of dark chocolate is scientifically proven to lift your spirits. I'm talking about rethinking comfort food and going for options that comfort your gut. Because when your gut is balanced, your mood stays lifted. After all, some of the most important hormones are produced in the gut, like serotonin, the feel-good hormone, and GABA, which helps you manage stress and anxiety. In fact, GABA is actually produced by your gut bugs. Clearly, keeping your gut happy goes a long way to keeping your spirits lifted.
So one of the weird things about our computer program is, like Tony Robbins is always fun to say, we run version 1.0 of our operating system. We've never had an upgrade. And the same goes to the foods and the plants and the fruit we eat. So we were supposed to eat fruit once a year. And when we were eating fruit, our brain says, oh my gosh, it's summer. Winter is right around the corner. You know, we should eat this stuff because winter's a tough time, whether it's dry season, a rainy season, a cold season. And we better store up fat. Just like a bear. You know, a bear's eating all those blueberries and huckleberries, and they're storing fat for the winter. Right. So if you're eating blueberries at Costco in February that came from Chile, your operating system doesn't know it's February. It says, heck, it's August, and winter's right around the corner, so I better eat some more of this stuff. And this is one of the things that's happening to us in particularly American society, but now most of the Western countries. Yeah. We're eating things that we have no business eating 365 days a year. And most of us are just getting ready for the winter that never comes.
Especially if you live in LA.
Yeah.
It's never getting cold.
Yeah, never comes.
You don't need to store that fat.
You really don't. Yeah, but that's part of the problem. But if you read an article saying that coffee is unhealthy, I want to put that myth to rest once and for all and tell you, coffee is healthy for you. Unless your doctor tells you otherwise, it's fine to drink coffee. In fact, regular coffee drinkers are shown to burn fat faster, enjoy improved energy and focus,
and even have an easier time with their blood sugar. Plus, there's also some links between long-term cognitive health and coffee drinking. So, if you happen to love coffee and your doctor says it's okay, go ahead, drink up. Just don't add sugar or A1 milk to the mix.
What I'm trying to get people to understand is this is not about you and me or what we conceive as us. We're just a condominium for the people who really run us, and these are all these little one-cellular organisms. And what we're beginning to realize is we're a condominium for these bugs. And we're their home. We've exchanged them living in us and actually taking care of us for food and shelter for them.
Huh.
And
it's crazy.
I know. And the really cool thing is, so we can take bacteria from young animals, and put them into old animals. And the bacteria say, man, this place is decrepit. I need to do a complete total renovation here because this is where I'm stuck and I better make the best of it. And I want everything to be nice. It's like, gentrification of the neighborhood. And this actually...
So what do they do?
So they actually instruct. Here's the take-home message. They actually send text messages to the mitochondria, and you probably know all about mitochondria, the little energy organelles.
Yes. In the brain, right?
In every one of you, but the brain has the most of them. And these produce energy. These mitochondria are actually engulfed bacteria. And as strange as it may seem, the bacteria in your gut send text messages to the mitochondria that say, guys, new sheriff's in town, clean up your act. We want you guys working and humming on all, 8 cylinders. It's kind of like General Kelly coming into the White House and total disarray. And it's going, okay, guys, no more of this silliness. And so we now have discovered some of those compounds that the bacteria in your gut signal the mitochondria to regenerate themselves. I think the first thing you do is get major lectin-containing foods out of your diet. You won't like me for a couple of weeks, but most people, even within a couple of weeks, begin to notice a difference. Now, what are those? They're foods that we actually, evolutionary, were not designed to eat. Beans are so lethal raw that there's very good published studies in humans that they can cause massive bloody diarrhea. And there's some pretty good studies in monkeys, rhesus monkeys and red velvet monkeys, that they can actually cause heart disease and even kidney damage from the lectin content. What's fascinating from a human evolution standpoint is that humans, up until the dawn of agriculture, were actually very tall creatures. Most humans were about 6 feet tall. And our brain size was about 15% bigger than it is today. And if you look chronologically, by 8,000 years, 2,000 years into grain and bean eating, we actually shrunk about a foot. And our brain size has never recovered from 10,000 years ago. So no matter what your fitness goals look like, you don't need to chow down on a steak to reach them. And you don't need a giant whey protein smoothie or one made with healthier pea, oat, or brown rice protein. The truth is, those are loaded with lectins. No, all you need is a healthy, balanced diet where vegetables come first. And stuff like meat is just a garnish rather than the main event. Sounds a little like the plant paradox plan, right? Well, that's because the plant paradox plan is the perfect diet for athletes because it's a great way to make sure you're eating enough vegetables. And veggies are essential for building strong muscles. So throw out that big tub of basic protein powder and focus on fueling your body with protein-rich, plant-based whole foods like avocados, nuts, and greens. If you must drink a protein drink, look for a powder that's the plant paradox compliant, something like hemp, algae, or flax-based proteins.
And remember, you really don't need more than 20 grams of animal protein a day. That's about 3 eggs or 3 ounces of grass-fed, grass-finished beef.
So you don't eat a lot of meat. Why not?
So we found that there was a molecule, a sugar molecule, on the wall of pig blood vessels that's totally different from the sugar molecule that's in ours. But it differs by only one, actually, atom. And it's called Nu5GC in pigs, cows, and lambs. And we carry what's called Nu5AC. And I have nothing against red meat. But if you look statistically, the red meat eaters do have significantly more coronary artery disease and significantly more cancer. Now, why cancer? Well, it turns out that cancer tumors in humans use Nu5GC to shield themselves from detection by the immune system. The problem is we don't manufacture Nu5GC, nor can a cancer cell, which means they acquired it from external sources, namely beef, lamb, and pork. Now, fish doesn't carry it. They have the same molecule that we do, and chicken have the same molecule that we do. So I urge people, if they're going to eat animal protein, and I do, to use wild shellfish or wild fish as their main source of animal protein. Do I eat meat? Yeah, I mean, do I eat beef? I do. But I get grass-fed and grass-finished beef, and I use it as a treat, not as a mainstay of my diet.
What we've completely missed from the Human Genome Project is that we have actually very few genes, and our genes are about 99% the same as a chimp or a gorilla. And we're very different than chimps or gorillas, and yet we have virtually the same genes. What makes us different is actually the bacteria and viruses that live in us.
We have different bacteria and viruses.
And you can actually show when humans evolved from the other great apes that our bacteria actually changed, and we can actually identify that point in time that the bacteria made us rather than our genes made us.
So the bacteria's made us human, or bacteria made us?
Yeah, they actually, as shocking as it may seem, most of what happens to us is determined by the state and the variation of our bacteria, primarily in our gut. Give you an example. You can take a bowel movement from an obese individual and feed it to a skinny rat. Skinny rats love to eat poop.
Right.
And those skinny rats will become fat.
Really?
Because the bacteria have actually manipulated their feeding habits. They actually send text messages to the brain to go look for foods that they would not otherwise consume that those bacteria want. And we can actually, there was a cool study in a marathon runner. You're a great athlete. So there's a woman marathon runner in England a couple of years ago who developed a very severe infection in her colon called C. difficile. A lot of people have heard of it.
Okay.
And the modern treatment of this now is a fecal transplant, taking poop from somebody else and shoving it up your ass.
Wow.
And you try to get a fecal transplant from a family member, because believe it or not, family members tend to share their bacteria. I share a lot of bacteria with my dogs, and they share with me. So they found a cousin who was a good match for her, and she got the fecal transplant, and everything went well. Her C. difficile went away. We can go into why that happened. But in the next year, this marathon runner gained 32 pounds.
Wow.
Without changing anything. And it turns out her cousin, was actually about 32 pounds overweight. And so she was inoculated with obesogenic bacteria. And her bacteria, these little, one-cell organisms, controlled her behavior.
If you want to see the top 10 we did on Dr. Jason Fung, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and we'll see you there.
In order to understand how the diet works, you have to understand a little bit about why people develop type 2 diabetes. One of the important things is that